It was just another late shift at Green Valley Hospital when Sarah first noticed the note. She had been working as a nurse for only 6 months, still learning the ropes, still trying to prove herself. At 20 years old, she felt like an outsider in the sterile, impersonal world of the hospital. But there was one patient who had caught her attention from the moment he arrived: Michael Thompson. Michael was only 25, but he had the kind of presence that made you look twice. Even in a hospital gown with tubes and monitors attached to him, he had an almost magnetic charm. His dark eyes seemed too calm for someone who was supposed to be suffering from a heart condition. The doctors said his heart was weak, that he might not live much longer. But Michael never seemed to fear death. Instead, he was strangely at peace. Sarah had been assigned to Michael's care ever since he'd arrived 3 weeks ago. She'd always kept things professional, trying not to let her personal feelings get in the way of her work. But Michael made it difficult. He'd smile at her in a way that made her heart skip a beat, ask her about her day, her life, in a way that made her feel seen. He was different from the other patients, and she couldn't help but be drawn to him. It was a little after 11 p.m. when Sarah entered his room to check on him. That's when the note fell from Michael's medical file. She picked it up and read the hastily scribbled words: "Don't trust anyone. My life depends on you. Meet me at midnight, Michael." Her heart skipped. What was going on? Why would Michael, someone who had always seemed so calm, write something like this? And why had he chosen her? She looked around the empty hallway, her nerves tightening. It was almost midnight. Her mind raced. Could she trust him? Was he in danger? What kind of trouble had he gotten himself into? As Sarah stood there, the weight of the note in her hand, a sense of unease settled over her. She didn't know what to expect when the clock struck 12, but she knew one thing for certain. This was no ordinary hospital visit. She was about to find herself tangled in something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined, and she had no idea what she was walking into. The clock ticked loudly in the sterile silence of the hospital hallway. Sarah felt her heart racing as she stood outside Michael's room, her breath shallow with anticipation. It was almost midnight now, and she had no idea what to expect. The note had said, "My life depends on you." It felt like a cryptic puzzle she had to solve, but she had no idea where the pieces would lead her. Taking a deep breath, Sarah pushed open the door to Michael's room. The soft light from the moon filtered through the window, casting a pale glow across the room. Michael was sitting up in bed, his dark hair slightly tousled. Even in a hospital gown, he looked almost too handsome to be real. There was a quiet intensity about him that made Sarah's pulse quicken every time their eyes met. He gave her a small, almost secretive smile as she entered. "You got my note," Michael said softly, his voice hoarse but steady. Sarah nodded, walking toward the bed, her mind still racing. "What's going on, Michael? Why did you say your life depends on me?" He motioned for her to sit beside him. Sarah hesitated for a moment, her eyes searching his face. He seemed different tonight, more vulnerable somehow, and it made her heart ache. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped in her lap, unsure of what to say or do. "Michael, what do you need from me?" "I don't understand," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael took a deep breath, his eyes locking onto hers. "Sarah, I'm not sick the way they say I am. My heart isn't failing. I've been poisoned." Her breath caught in her throat. "Poisoned? But how? Why?" He looked at her with a mixture of fear and determination. "I've been part of something horrible, something I didn't even realize until it was too late. The people who are supposed to be helping me are the ones who are trying to kill me." Sarah's mind whirled. She had always known there was something off about Michael's case. The calmness he exhibited, the way he always seemed so composed despite the diagnosis, it didn't add up. But poisoned? She couldn't fathom it. "Michael, who's doing this to you? And why?" Her voice was shaky, filled with both concern and confusion. Michael's face grew tense and he lowered his voice. "It's a company called MedTech. They're a pharmaceutical company that has a secret deal with this hospital. I used to work for them as a researcher. At first, I thought we were developing drugs to help people, but then I found out the truth. They were using patients like me as test subjects." Sarah's stomach churned. "You're saying they've been testing dangerous drugs on people without their consent?" "Yes," Michael replied, his voice low but filled with sorrow. "And when the patients get too sick or start asking questions, they make it look like the person just died from their condition. I wasn't supposed to live this long, but I did. Now they're trying to finish what they started. The poison has been building in my system, and it's not just affecting my heart. It's killing me slowly." Michael's confession left Sarah speechless. The room seemed to close in on her as the weight of his words sank in. How could something like this be happening? And why hadn't anyone known? "Michael, I don't know what to say," she said softly, her voice trembling. "But you're not alone. I'll help you. I'll make sure the truth gets out." Michael reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he grasped hers. "I need you to promise me something, Sarah. If something happens to me, if I don't make it, there's something you need to find. It's in a safety deposit box at Citibank, box number 247. The key is with me." Sarah's eyes widened. "What's in the box?" "The evidence," Michael replied, his voice urgent. "Photos, documents, recordings, proof of everything they've been doing. It's the only thing that can stop them, but you have to promise me you'll find it. If I don't make it through the night." He paused, his voice faltering as he gazed into Sarah's eyes. "Promise me you'll save the people they're hurting. Promise me you'll get this evidence to the police." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she squeezed his hand. She had no idea what she was about to get involved in, but Michael's desperation, his sincerity, made her heart ache. She felt a deep sense of responsibility, but also something else, something she couldn't quite name. She couldn't let him die, not like this. Not when he had given her the chance to make things right. "I promise, Michael," she whispered. "I'll do whatever it takes." Michael's face softened, a small relieved smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Thank you, Sarah. You don't know what this means to me." For a moment, they sat in silence, the only sound the faint beeping of Michael's heart monitor. The weight of his confession hung in the air between them, but so did something else, a quiet understanding. A bond forged in the midst of fear and uncertainty. As Sarah looked down at their intertwined hands, she realized something else. This wasn't just about saving Michael. This was about exposing a system of corruption that was killing innocent people, and she had a chance to stop it. But as she looked back up at Michael, she knew that whatever happened, she would be forever changed. And she would never forget the man who had given his last wish to someone like her, and in that moment, she promised herself that she would see it through. She would make sure Michael's sacrifice wasn't in vain. The following hours dragged on in a blur. Sarah stayed by Michael's side, watching him carefully as he slept fitfully. His breathing was shallow, and the rhythmic beeping of his heart monitor seemed louder than ever. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Every time she checked his vital signs, she felt the weight of the promise she'd made hanging over her. She had to protect him, but how? As midnight passed, the quiet hum of the hospital became almost unbearable. Sarah had to remind herself to breathe, to stay focused. The evidence Michael had entrusted her with could change everything. But it wasn't enough just to find it. She had to act on it. Michael's words echoed in her mind. "They're trying to kill me." She had to believe him, but the truth seemed too unbelievable. Who could be behind something so cruel? And why him? Why poison him instead of letting his condition naturally take its course? The clock struck 2 a.m. when Sarah finally decided to check on Michael again. As she stood by his bed, she saw the familiar small red marks on his arm once more. Marks that weren't from his IV line. This time they were more pronounced, clearer. Needle pricks. But why had she not noticed them before? Was she too distracted by his charm, his mysterious allure, to pay attention? Her fingers brushed against his arm as she gently pulled back the blanket. The marks were fading, but the memory of them lingered in her mind. These were not fresh wounds. These were old, hidden under layers of bandages and gauze designed to blend in with his pale skin. Slowly, the realization sank in. Michael had been poisoned, and it wasn't just a one-time thing. It had been happening for weeks. Someone had been dosing him, gradually weakening him. He was never truly dying from a heart condition. Her heart sank as the full scope of the conspiracy hit her. Michael wasn't sick. He had been used. His illness was manufactured. Her hands trembled as she fumbled for his chart, hoping for some kind of explanation. But there was nothing there. His chart showed the same diagnosis, the same course of treatment. No one had ever suspected foul play. The doctors, the nurses, no one had noticed the signs, the slow decline in his condition. The poison had been subtle, so well disguised that even the professionals had missed it. Michael stirred in the bed, his hand moving toward his chest as he let out a soft groan. Sarah quickly checked his heart rate, which had begun to rise again. irregular and fast. His pulse was erratic and his breathing was labored. She pulled her stethoscope from her neck, kneeling beside him and listening carefully. His heart sounded weak, but there was a faint gurgling sound in his chest that shouldn't have been there. "Michael," Sarah whispered, shaking his shoulder gently. "Michael, wake up. What's happening to you?" His eyes fluttered open slowly and he blinked at her in confusion. "Sarah, what time is it?" His voice was weak, barely above a whisper. "It's 2 a.m., she replied, trying to steady her voice. "Your heart rate is irregular again. We need to get you some help." But Michael shook his head weakly, the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. "I'm fine," he muttered, though his words were unconvincing. "It happens sometimes." Sarah didn't believe him. She could feel the panic rising in her chest as she checked his vital signs again. His heart rate was still dangerously high and his pulse seemed weaker than it should have been. "Michael, you're not fine," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Something's wrong. These marks on your arm, they're not from your IV. You've been poisoned. Someone's been giving you something." Slowly, over time, Michael's expression shifted from drowsiness to sharp awareness. His eyes widened, his hand gripping hers with surprising strength. "Sarah, don't trust anyone. Please," he pleaded. "The doctors, the staff, they're all involved. They're the ones who've been poisoning me." Her mind reeled. How could this be happening? The hospital, the place she trusted most, was the very place that was hiding a deadly conspiracy. "I don't know who I can trust anymore, Sarah," Michael whispered. "I don't have much time left. You need to promise me that if I don't make it, you'll find the evidence. The truth is in a safety deposit box at Citibank. Box number 247, you have to find it. Sarah, it's the only way to stop them." His voice trailed off, his words losing strength as his breathing became more shallow. Michael's face was pale, his eyes growing dim. Sarah could see it now, the gradual effects of the poison. He had been slipping away all this time, each dose making him weaker, pushing him closer to the edge. He was right. The heart condition had always been a cover-up. "No, Michael," Sarah cried, shaking him gently. "You're not dying. We can fix this. I'll get you the help you need." But Michael's eyes fluttered closed, his breathing erratic. She checked his pulse again, her hands trembling as she felt for his heartbeat. It was still there, but faint. Too faint. She had to do something. "Don't give up, Michael," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with desperation. "Please don't give up." But as she watched him slip deeper into unconsciousness, she realized the truth. He was slipping away from her, and she was the only one who could stop this. With newfound resolve, Sarah grabbed her phone and dialed the number she knew would lead her to the truth. She couldn't save him now, but she could still save others. She would find the evidence Michael had left behind, and she would make sure the people behind this were held accountable. She wouldn't let his death be in vain, and she wouldn't let them get away with it. The silence in Michael's room was broken, only by the occasional beep of his heart monitor. The moonlight still filtered through the window, casting a soft glow across the room, but the quiet was far from peaceful. Sarah sat beside Michael, her eyes never leaving him. The poison had clearly taken its toll. His skin had paled even further, and his breathing was shallow, labored. She had stayed up with him all night, making sure he didn't slip away on her watch. She glanced at the clock on the wall, 4 a.m. The hospital was eerily quiet, the halls deserted. It felt like the entire world had been put on pause as she tried to process everything Michael had shared with her. The truth about MedTech, the evidence he had hidden for her to find, and the fact that someone was trying to kill him right under everyone's noses. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. At first she ignored them. It was probably just another nurse on a late-night round. But then the footsteps stopped outside Michael's door. Her heart skipped a beat. There was something about the rhythm of those steps that didn't sit right with her. It wasn't the usual hurried shuffle of someone doing their job. It was too deliberate, too quiet. Before she could even think to check the hallway, the door opened. A man in a white coat entered the room. But he wasn't Dr. Johnson, Michael's regular doctor. Sarah froze, her heart pounding. The man's presence was unsettling, and the way he scanned the room made her skin crawl. There was a coldness in his eyes, a lack of care that sent a shiver down her spine. He wasn't here for Michael's well-being. "Time for your medicine," the man said, his voice monotone, unfeeling. Michael stirred in the bed, his brow furrowing as he weakly raised his hand. "No more," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I don't want any more. The man smiled coldly, not bothering to answer. Instead, he moved to the IV line and prepared a syringe with a liquid Sarah didn't recognize. The faint glint of the needle caught the light as he filled it, and Sarah's stomach twisted with a feeling of dread. Please, no more, Michael pleaded, his voice trembling. He tried to sit up, but he was too weak. His body was fighting, but it couldn't keep up. Sarah's instincts kicked in and she moved closer, but before she could intervene, the man sharply motioned for her to stay back. It's not your choice, the man said, his voice ice cold. Sarah watched in helpless horror as the man injected the syringe into Michael's IV. Her breath caught in her throat as Michael's body tensed, and his face twisted in pain. His eyes fluttered, but the struggle was brief. Within moments, his body went limp, his breathing slowing to an almost imperceptible rate. No, Sarah gasped, rushing to Michael's side. She checked his pulse, her fingers shaking. His pulse was faint, his skin cold to the touch. She could feel the panic rising in her chest. The man in the white coat stepped back, watching with an eerie calmness. He's not dead, he said, his tone dismissive. Just let him rest. The medication will take effect. Who are you? Sarah demanded, her voice shaking with fear and anger. What did you do to him? The man didn't answer. Instead, he turned and began to leave the room, his footsteps echoing in the silence. As he reached the door, he paused and glanced back over his shoulder, his face expressionless. You should go home, nurse, he said flatly. Your shift is over. But Sarah wasn't about to let him get away with this. As the door closed behind him, Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She had to act quickly. Michael was in danger. Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. She had seen the poison take effect. She knew what it was doing to him. The man had injected something that wasn't on Michael's treatment plan. She had seen the medicine on the syringe, and it wasn't meant for heart conditions. Her first instinct was to call for help, but she stopped herself. The strange doctor was already one step ahead. She couldn't trust anyone. Not anymore. Sarah ran to the door, locking it behind her. She turned to Michael, whose chest was rising and falling in an unnatural rhythm, his face pale and drained of color. She grabbed his chart from the side table and scanned it. She couldn't find the name of the drug the fake doctor had administered. It wasn't listed anywhere. Her breath quickened as she realized the terrifying truth. They were trying to kill him. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. But how could she get them when the very people she should be able to trust might be involved? Michael had told her not to trust anyone, but she didn't know who was behind the conspiracy. It could be anyone in the hospital. She had to protect Michael. She had no choice now. If she didn't, he wouldn't make it through the night. Her promise to him weighed heavily on her heart. She needed to find the evidence he'd hidden, and she had to do it quickly before it was too late. With a final glance at Michael, Sarah left the room, determined to uncover the truth. The stakes were higher than ever, and time was running out. As she stepped into the hallway, she heard the distant echo of footsteps again. But this time she wasn't going to wait. She had to act. For Michael. For everyone else who might be in danger. And she couldn't let anyone stop her now. The halls of Green Valley Hospital felt colder than usual as Sarah rushed down them, her heart racing in her chest. The weight of what she had just witnessed, the fake doctor, the syringe, and Michael's deteriorating condition, pushed her into overdrive. There was no time to waste. Michael's life was in her hands, and she had to find the evidence he'd entrusted to her. Her mind raced with every possible outcome. Who could she trust? The doctors? The staff? She didn't know who was involved in the conspiracy. She only knew one thing. Michael had been poisoned, and he was not going to make it unless she acted fast. As she reached the elevator, Sarah glanced over her shoulder to make sure no one was following her. The hospital was eerily quiet at this hour, but she still felt the looming sense of danger. She pressed the elevator button frantically, wishing she could move faster. The doors slid open and she stepped inside, barely able to catch her breath. The elevator ride felt like an eternity as she headed down to the parking garage. The second she reached her car, Sarah threw open the door and started the engine. The night air was cool, but the heat inside the car felt suffocating as she gripped the wheel tightly. Michael's face, pale and helpless, lingered in her mind. The injection had already taken its toll. She didn't have much time. She had to get to City Bank before it was too late. She drove through the empty streets, her thoughts consumed by the mission ahead. Michael's key, tucked in her pocket, was the only hope they had left. The evidence she needed to expose the people responsible for this twisted plot was in box number 247. It was the only thing that could bring the criminals to justice and possibly save Michael. When she finally reached the bank, Sarah's hands shook as she approached the teller. She tried to keep her composure, but the fear in her eyes was impossible to hide. The teller led her to a small room in the back, where the safety deposit boxes were kept. Sarah could barely keep still as the key in her hand felt heavier with every step. After what felt like an eternity, the teller unlocked box 247. The contents inside were everything Sarah needed to understand the full extent of the conspiracy. Her hands trembled as she pulled out the stack of documents, photos, and recordings. It was all there, the proof. The first thing Sarah noticed were the photos. There were pictures of Michael, but not in the hospital. These were taken in a laboratory. She scanned the images, her stomach sinking as she realized what they were. Tests. Experiments. People lying unconscious in hospital beds, hooked up to the same machines Michael had been using. They were all part of the experiment, part of MedTech's cruel scheme to test unapproved drugs on patients without their consent. Next, she found documents, signed consent forms, contracts, and research papers that detailed the drugs they were testing. The most chilling part? There were names. Names of patients, dates, times, all marked with experimental drugs, labeled as treatments for various conditions, but none of them approved by any regulatory board. Sarah's hands shook as she flipped through the papers. It was worse than she could have imagined. MedTech wasn't just conducting unethical research. They were actively killing people. And Michael was just one of many. At the bottom of the box, Sarah found a small recorder. She pressed play and Michael's voice crackled through the speakers. "If you're hearing this, then I'm probably gone." Michael's voice said, soft but clear, "I want you to know that meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me in this mess. You gave me hope when I had none left. Please, save the others. They're still testing, still hurting people like me. The evidence is in that box. Don't let them get away with it." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she listened. The weight of Michael's words, his last words, crushed her. He knew he wouldn't make it. He had known all along. And yet, despite his imminent death, he had chosen to protect the innocent. She wiped the tears from her eyes, knowing there was no time to grieve. Michael's message was clear: the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. As she closed the box and put everything back inside, Sarah knew she had to get this evidence to the police. The lives of countless patients depended on it. But as she looked at the clock on her dashboard, she realized she was running out of time. The police had to act quickly. The criminals in the hospital, the ones who had poisoned Michael, were still out there. She couldn't let them cover their tracks. They had to be exposed for everything they had done. She started her car and drove toward the police station. Her mind focused on one thing: bringing the truth to light. As she drove through the dark streets, her thoughts returned to Michael, his sacrifice, his last wish, and the promise she had made to him. She would make sure he was remembered. No matter what it took, she would make sure the truth was exposed. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as she pulled into the parking lot of the police station. The evidence she had retrieved from the safety deposit box clutched tightly in her hands. Every second felt like an eternity. Her mind raced, unable to fully grasp the gravity of what she had uncovered. The truth was far worse than she could have ever imagined. Michael's death, the poison, the hospital's complicity, it was all part of a much larger conspiracy. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. She jumped out of the car, the cold night air biting at her skin, and rushed inside. The building was quiet, and the officers at the desk looked up with mild curiosity as she approached. "I need to speak to someone in charge," Sarah said urgently, her voice trembling. "It's about a medical conspiracy. People are being poisoned at Green Valley Hospital." The officer, sensing the urgency in her voice, nodded quickly and led her down a hallway toward an office. She was on the verge of breaking down, but she held it together long enough to explain what she had discovered. She handed the officer the folder containing the photos, documents, and the recorder with Michael's last message. The officer's expression shifted as he flipped through the materials. His brow furrowed as he absorbed the full extent of the evidence. "Ma'am, this is..." He trailed off, his voice shaking with disbelief. This is enough to bring down an entire medical network. I have to make sure it's stopped, Sarah said, her voice urgent, pleading. You have to act fast. Michael's gone, but he saved the others. If you don't do something now, more people will die. The officer nodded grimly, and within minutes they had put together a plan. Officers were dispatched immediately to Green Valley Hospital, armed with the information Sarah had provided. There was no time to waste. The corruption was running deep, and the hospital's staff, including some doctors and administrators, were involved in a network that stretched further than anyone could have imagined. As Sarah sat in the waiting area, her mind raced with thoughts of Michael. She wished with all her heart that he could see this moment, that his sacrifice wasn't in vain. He had died, believing that exposing the truth was the only way to protect future patients. Now it was up to Sarah to ensure that those responsible were held accountable. The waiting felt endless. Sarah couldn't stop replaying Michael's last moments in her mind. She remembered the frail, hopeful look in his eyes when he gave her the key, the quiet plea in his voice as he asked her to fulfill his final wish. He had died a hero, even if he hadn't known it at the time. He had loved her, and in the end, his love had driven him to make a difference, even at the cost of his own life. The door to the office opened, and the officer from earlier walked in with a look of determination on his face. We're in, he said. The raid is underway. We have teams at the hospital and MedTech's corporate office. It's all happening right now. We're going to expose everything. Sarah's heart soared with relief, but she couldn't shake the sadness that weighed heavily on her chest. Michael was gone, and there was no bringing him back. But his death wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something bigger. The hospital would be cleaned up, and the truth would come out. As the officers prepared for the raid, Sarah's thoughts turned to Michael's sister, Emma. She'd been missing for months, and Michael had never told her the full story. He had kept everything locked inside, hoping to protect her from the horrors he had uncovered. Now Sarah knew she had to find Emma, to let her know that her brother had done everything in his power to save others, even at the cost of his own life. At that moment, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was a text from the officer leading the raid. We found Emma, she's alive. She's been held at the MedTech office. We're bringing her in now. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she read the message. Emma had been living in a nightmare for months, unaware of what had been happening to her brother. But now she would know the truth. She would know what Michael had sacrificed for her, and for everyone else who had been hurt by MedTech's experiments. The raid was successful, and by morning, the police had arrested several individuals, including the fake doctor who had poisoned Michael. Investigations were launched into the extent of the corruption within the hospital and the pharmaceutical company. The truth about the unethical drug testing, the falsified medical records, and the patients who had been used as test subjects was exposed to the world. When Sarah arrived back at Green Valley Hospital later that morning, the police had already sealed off the area. Nurses and staff were being questioned, and the building that had once felt so safe now felt like a prison for those involved in the conspiracy. As she walked through the hallways, Sarah's gaze lingered on Michael's empty room. It felt so surreal to know that he was gone, that he had never made it out. But she promised herself that she would never forget him. Michael's sacrifice had saved lives, and she would make sure his memory lived on. Later that day, Sarah stood in front of a grave. She had come to pay her respects to Michael, but she couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of loss. She knelt down, placing a single white flower on the grave. I did it, Michael, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I kept my promise. The truth is out, and the people responsible are being held accountable. She closed her eyes, remembering Michael's final words to her. I love you, Sarah, I always will. She would carry his love with her always. Michael Thompson had died a hero, and Sarah had fulfilled his final wish. The fight wasn't over, but it had just begun, and she would keep fighting for him, for the truth, for the lives he had saved, and for the people who still needed her help, and for Michael she would never stop. 6 months had passed since Michael's death. The world had moved on, but for Sarah time had slowed to a crawl. Every week, without fail, she visited his grave. It wasn't out of obligation, but because she couldn't let go. She couldn't forget the man who had taught her so much, who had given his life to expose a dangerous conspiracy. Michael had loved her, and in his last moments, he had trusted her with everything, his deepest fears, his final wish, and his legacy. Today, like every week, Sarah stood before the grave. a soft breeze rustling the leaves around her. She held a small bouquet of white lilies, the same flowers Michael had once mentioned he wanted to bring her. As she placed them gently on the gravestone, the wind seemed to carry her words to him. "Michael," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "I've kept my promise. The world knows the truth now. MedTech is gone. The hospital has changed. And Emma, she's safe. We did it. We stopped them." Sarah paused, her fingers tracing the letters of his name etched in stone. She smiled softly, though her eyes were wet. Michael's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. His death had shaken the foundation of the medical world, exposing the corrupt practices of a pharmaceutical empire that had been preying on the vulnerable for years. The police had arrested everyone involved in the conspiracy. The truth was out, and the evidence had changed everything. Emma, Michael's sister, had been found in the MedTech office, barely alive but alive nonetheless. She had been in hiding for months, kept isolated from the world, never knowing what had happened to her brother. Sarah had personally delivered Michael's last message to her, the letter he had written explaining everything. It had been the hardest thing Sarah had ever done, but seeing the relief and sorrow in Emma's eyes had been worth it. Michael had loved her deeply, and now Emma could begin to heal knowing the truth. The trial had been long and grueling. Sarah had testified, presenting the evidence Michael had entrusted to her. Every detail of MedTech's corruption came to light. The unapproved drug testing, the falsified patient records, the countless lives destroyed by greed and indifference. The people responsible were sentenced to long prison terms, and the hospital was forced to undergo a complete overhaul. Despite the justice that had been served, the ache of losing Michael lingered. There were days when Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of his absence, when the emptiness seemed unbearable. But then she remembered his smile, the way he had trusted her, the way he had loved her even when he knew his time was running out. She had to keep going, for him. As Sarah stood there, lost in her thoughts, a car pulled up beside the cemetery gates. Emma stepped out, her face more serene than Sarah had seen in months. She had changed. The trauma of the past was still there, but there was a quiet strength in her eyes. Sarah walked over to her, and the two women exchanged a silent embrace before standing side by side in front of Michael's grave. "I brought you something," Emma said softly, reaching into her bag and pulling out a small wooden box. "It's from Michael. He kept this for me." Sarah took the box from her hands, her heart skipping a beat. It was small, delicate, and worn with age. Emma opened it, revealing a stack of old letters tied together with a faded ribbon. Each one was addressed to Emma, written in Michael's hand, filled with his thoughts, his regrets, and his hopes for the future. He had written them in the months before his death, hoping that someday, somehow, Emma would be able to read them. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she realized what this meant. Michael had never stopped caring about his sister, even when he was fighting for his own life. He had kept these letters to ensure that Emma would know everything, the truth about the conspiracy, the love he had for her, and the life he wished they could have had. "I didn't know he kept these," Emma said quietly. "He never talked about them. But now I know what he was trying to do. He was saving us all." Together, Sarah and Emma sat on the grass beside Michael's grave, reading the letters aloud. They laughed through their tears as Michael's words brought back memories of better times, of a brother who had always tried to protect his family, no matter the cost. And in that moment, Sarah knew that Michael's legacy would live on, not just in the justice they had fought for, but in the hearts of everyone who loved him. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the cemetery, Sarah stood and looked one last time at Michael's grave. There would always be a hole in her heart where he had once been, but she had learned so much from him: love, sacrifice, and courage. These were the lessons Michael had given her, and they were the lessons she would carry with her forever. "I won't forget you," she whispered, her voice steady now. "I'll make sure the world remembers you as the hero you were." With Emma by her side, Sarah walked away, the weight of her grief lightened by the knowledge that Michael's fight had not been in vain. The truth had been exposed and lives had been saved, and in the end, that was all Michael had ever wanted. As the days passed, Sarah continued to honor his memory. She became an advocate for medical transparency, for patient rights, and for the safety of those who were too often overlooked. Michael's story was her story now, and she would spend the rest of her life ensuring that his sacrifice was never forgotten. Michael Thompson, the man who had died a hero, would live on in the hearts of those he saved, and in the fight for justice he had sparked.